Thanks for watching Endgame Economics. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. It's completely free for you, and it helps us continue making more videos like this.
Let's just jump right into this explainer because today we are unpacking the unseen, honestly almost unnatural mechanics behind the currency holding 20 vastly different nations together. When you buy a coffee in Athens or a phone charger in Berlin, you're using the exact same euro. It feels totally seamless. But beneath that simple everyday transaction lies one of the absolute most daring financial experiments in human history. You're holding a currency that belongs to sovereign nations with entirely different tax codes, labor laws, and levels of government debt. We're looking at the European Central Bank, the ECB, and exactly how it commands the financial gravity for over 315 million people. Think about it like this. How do you set one single thermostat for 20 completely different rooms? This perfectly visualizes the ECB's foundational flaw. They're trying to set one interest rate for 20 totally different economic climates. See, if an economy is running too hot with high inflation, a central bank usually raises the rate to cool it down. If it's freezing in a recession, you lower the rate to heat things up. But when you have one central bank for 20 nations experiencing wildly different economic weather, finding that perfect temperature, it actually becomes mathematically impossible. So here's how we're going to break down this massive 25-year history. We've got 5 parts. First, the Frankenstein currency. Second, the sovereign doom loop. Third, breaking financial gravity. Fourth, the hidden wealth tax. And finally, the ECB's future traps. Part 1, the Frankenstein currency. Let's look at the genesis of the Eurozone, which was this brilliantly ambitious idea that eliminated exchange rate risk, but completely ignored a massive structural catch. Imagine moving into a huge house with 19 roommates. You all agree to share one communal bank account to pay for things. Sounds great, right? But here's the catch. Every single roommate still keeps their own personal credit card. That means a government like Greece could quietly run up massive debts without ever asking the rest of the house for permission. The architects of the euro created a monetary union without a fiscal union. The ECB controlled the currency, but they had absolutely no actual control over individual government spending. To put into perspective just how tricky this gets, look at Germany and Spain in the early 2000s. Germany's economy was sluggish, so the ECB had to compromise and keep interest rates really low to help them out. But Spain was experiencing a roaring real estate boom. Because the ECB kept rates low for Germany, they accidentally poured gasoline all over Spain's economy, mechanically fueling a massive 115% housing price spike over a decade. If Spain had its own central bank, they would have aggressively raised rates to cool things off, but they couldn't. It's a textbook example of how a one-size-fits-all monetary policy is basically never optimal for an individual country. Moving to part 2, the sovereign doom loop. Fast forward to 2009, and that whole roommate illusion completely shattered when the market realized that lending money to a fundamentally broke government was not, in fact, zero risk. 15%. That figure right there was the actual Greek budget deficit revealed in 2009. They had originally reported 3.7%, so you can imagine the visceral panic this triggered. Up until this point, European regulators officially classified all Eurozone sovereign debt as holding literally zero mathematical risk. Investors were treating a loan to Greece exactly the same as a loan to the industrial powerhouse of Germany. But when that 15% number dropped, reality violently reasserted itself. Greek 10-year bond yields skyrocketed toward an absurd 30%, swallowing up their tax revenue just to pay the interest. This panic kicked off what experts call the sovereign bank doom loop. It's essentially a mechanical nightmare where 2 drowning swimmers try to use each other as a flotation device. It goes like this. Governments look shaky, so the value of their bonds crash. But domestic banks hold massive amounts of those exact same bonds, meaning the banks are suddenly facing multi-billion euro losses. To prevent a banking collapse, the government borrows even more money to bail them out, which, you guessed it, makes the market panic even more, crashing the bonds further. This vicious cycle threatened to tear through Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Italy, and it genuinely could have sparked a global depression. And then comes this legendary 3-sentence verbal bazooka from ECB President Mario Draghi in 2012. He simply stated the ECB would do whatever it takes. That instantly broke the doom loop. At a time when the ECB was legally forbidden from directly financing member governments, Draghi essentially reminded the markets that he had an infinite digital money printer. He implied they would buy an unlimited amount of government bonds if speculators pushed rates too high. The global markets took one look at a central bank capable of creating unlimited euros on a computer ledger, realized they couldn't win that game of financial chicken, and instantly folded. Spanish yields plunged from 7.5% to under 4.5%. Part 3. Breaking financial gravity. Draghi absolutely saved the euro that day, but the side effects of his cure dragged the continent into the very weird, upside-down world of zero and negative interest rates. Enter quantitative easing, or QE. The Eurozone was severely sick with the threat of deflation. If consumers think things will be cheaper tomorrow, they don't spend today, and the economy flatlines. So, to force money into the real economy, the ECB started creating money out of thin air to buy up massive amounts of assets. They morphed into the absolute master of the European economy, swelling their balance sheet to a staggering peak of nearly 8.8 trillion euros. By buying up government bonds with newly minted money, they mathematically crushed interest yields down. Now, in normal capitalism, if you save 100 grand, you earn interest, right? Well, starting in 2014, the ECB basically inverted the core foundation of finance. They hit commercial banks with a minus 0.5% deposit rate. Let that sink in. They were systematically taxing banks for parking excess cash safely in Frankfurt. Critics argued this was extreme monetary pressure, basically monetary waterboarding, designed to force banks to take that cash and lend it to businesses and consumers. There was no other escape. But when money is essentially free to borrow, you get what analysts call a zombie economy. In a healthy system, bad companies go bankrupt. It's harsh, but it frees up capital and workers for dynamic, innovative startups. It's called creative destruction. But with this cheap monetary morphine, fundamentally uncompetitive companies could just roll over their debt indefinitely. Natural capitalist destruction got turned off. These zombie firms hoarded labor and capital, masking deep structural diseases in the corporate sector that were never actually cured. Which brings us to part 4, the hidden wealth tax. The ECB successfully suspended the laws of financial gravity for 8 years, basically assuming inflation was dead forever. But then, 2022 happened. Boom, 10.6%. Fueled by post-pandemic supply chain shocks, the war in Ukraine, and a historic amount of newly minted money, inflation violently kicked down the front door. In October 2022, it shattered the ECB's 2% target, forcing Christine Lagarde to aggressively hike rates. But remember the doom loop? Raising rates threatened to bankrupt heavily indebted countries like Italy all over again. So the ECB actually had to invent a complex new tool, the transmission protection instrument, just to artificially keep Italy's borrowing costs down while simultaneously hiking rates everywhere else to fight inflation. This entire era really highlights something called the Cantillon effect. When a central bank creates trillions of euros out of thin air, it doesn't just magically sprinkle evenly over everyone. It enters the financial sector first. Massive commercial banks and multinational corporations got their hands on this newly available, cheap money and used it for things like real estate purchases and stock buybacks. Many economists point out that this effectively turned monetary policy into a hidden wealth tax. If you already owned assets when the printer turned on, your wealth skyrocketed. If you didn't, you fell way behind. The data here tells a horrifyingly simple story. Look at the massive gap. EU housing prices shot up 47%, effectively doubling or tripling in major cities like Berlin, Amsterdam, and Dublin. But wage growth? It just sluggishly crawled along at about 2% a year. Asset inflation aggressively outpaced wages, systematically diluting the value of everyday labor relative to the wealth of people who already owned assets. Now, the ECB correctly points out that their policies created millions of jobs and kept unemployment at record lows. But the paycheck from those jobs simply couldn't keep up with the skyrocketing cost of actually trying to buy a home. Finally, Part 5, the ECB's future traps. They managed to avoid a total collapse in 2022, and they've even shrunk their balance sheet down from 8.8 trillion to roughly 6.1 trillion euros. But as they pull the plug and drain the bathtub, some terrifying structural monsters are being revealed at the bottom.
First up is a massive demographic time bomb. By late 2025, we're looking at 35% retirees to 65% working age population. Why does the central bank care about that? Because a retiree is a pure consumer who produces zero economic supply. Meanwhile, the shrinking pool of working age people gains huge leverage to demand higher wages. Fewer workers plus massive retiree demand for healthcare and services equals sticky structural inflation. And here's the trap. You literally cannot print a 25-year-old factory worker or nurse. The ECB is totally powerless to stop demographic inflation.
Then there's the highly debated green mandate. Historically, central banks maintained market neutrality. They bought a proportional slice of whatever bonds the market offered. But now, the ECB applies a severe penalty or a haircut to bonds from fossil fuel companies. This artificially makes it much cheaper for green companies to borrow and way more expensive for carbon-heavy companies to survive. Critics are pointing out some serious mission creep here, arguing that the ECB is effectively picking economic winners and losers, acting as unelected climate regulators without a single democratic vote. At the exact same time, they are rushing to build a fully programmable digital euro. Right now, European card transactions are heavily reliant on U.S. payment rails like Visa and MasterCard, and the ECB wants total sovereign control. But this raises huge alarms for privacy advocates. A highly centralized digital currency could theoretically become a direct pipeline from the central bank right into your wallet. In a future crisis, it could completely weld shut the escape hatch of physical cash, meaning citizens couldn't just pull their money out of the bank to avoid something like negative interest rates.
But perhaps the biggest structural monster is this massive geopolitical trap. Just look at these numbers. Back in 2008, the EU economy was actually slightly larger than the United States, $16.2 trillion to $14.7 trillion. Today, the US has exploded to roughly $28 trillion, while Europe has completely stagnated around $18 trillion. Because the ECB spent the last 15 years desperately using monetary duct tape to manage sovereign debt crises, they prioritized survival over funding high-risk, high-reward innovation. Every euro spent keeping a dying company afloat is a euro kept away from a young tech founder in Paris or Berlin.
So as we wrap up this explainer, the ECB has definitely proven they will do whatever it takes to manage the decline and keep the Frankenstein monster alive. They have been the ultimate crisis manager for 20 incredibly unique nations, and the political will suggests the euro is here to stay. But survival is not the same thing as prosperity. It leaves us with one deeply uncomfortable question to chew on. Is this system a sustainable triumph of political cooperation, or is it just a highly regulated, stagnating open-air museum? Think about that next time you tap to pay for that coffee.